For years, I had done everything for my son, Ethan. I had worked long hours at multiple jobs, sacrificed my own needs, and given up parts of my life just to ensure he had everything he could ever need. I remember the sleepless nights, working extra shifts to pay for his education, and the many times I missed family dinners and important moments. I never minded. After all, he was my son, and I would do anything for him. I had always believed that the more I gave, the more he would appreciate me, but that belief started to crack the day I lost my job. It was a normal Tuesday morning when I received the call. The company I had worked for over the years had downsized, and my position was no longer available. I sat there, stunned, holding the phone in my hand as the realization sank in. I was suddenly without income, without security. I had always been the one to keep everything together for my family, and now, for the first time, I felt lost. I didn't know what to do next, so I called Ethan. He was busy with his own life, of course, and I never wanted to burden him with my problems, but this felt different. I needed someone. I needed him. Maybe he wouldn't be able to fix things, but surely he could offer some support, some reassurance that everything would be okay. But when I told him I had lost my job, the response I received left me speechless. His voice, cold and distant, shot back at me. "What do you expect me to do, Mom? You're always fine on your own. This is your problem, not mine." His words hit me like a slap in the face, each one more painful than the last. I tried to explain, tried to tell him how scared I was, but he interrupted me, his tone growing sharper with every sentence. "I don't have time for this. You've always been independent. So figure it out," he said. And without another word, he hung up. I stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Ethan, the boy I had raised, the one I had poured everything into, had just turned his back on me. He wasn't the same person I had raised with so much love and care. In that moment, all the sacrifices I had made for him felt utterly meaningless. He didn't see me anymore. Not as his mother, not as someone who had given everything to make sure he was comfortable, happy, and successful. I wasn't even sure if he saw me as a person at all. I was just a burden, something he had to deal with, and not even worth his time or attention. The sting of his rejection didn't fade. In fact, it only deepened with every passing hour. But there was something inside me that shifted, something that made me realize that I had spent too many years being the giver, the one who always put everyone else's needs before my own. I had spent so much time helping Ethan achieve his dreams that I had forgotten about my own. And in that moment, I knew something had to change. I had always put my family first, but now it was time to put myself first. I didn't want to depend on Ethan anymore. I didn't need his help, his approval, or his pity. I'd worked hard all my life, and now I would make sure that I took care of myself. No one else would dictate my worth, not even my son. I wasn't sure how I was going to move forward yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This was my turning point. There was something else that I had to consider, something Ethan didn't know. In my quiet moments when I wasn't caring for him or working myself to the bone, I had made an important decision for him. I had secretly bought him a new car, a brand new model, something I knew he had wanted for years. I had worked hard to save for it, knowing that it would be a great gift. But now, after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if he even deserved it. Would he appreciate it, or would he just see it as another thing he was entitled to? As I thought about it, I realized that the car was more than just a gift. It was a symbol of everything I had done for him, everything I had sacrificed, and everything I was willing to give, even if he didn't appreciate it. But that car wasn't just going to be a gift anymore. I would keep it to myself for now and use it as a reminder that I had more to offer than just being a mother who gave, and gave until there was nothing left. I wasn't sure what the next steps would be, but I knew one thing. I had to start living for myself. No more living in the shadow of my son's expectations. No more sacrificing my happiness for the sake of someone who didn't even value me. It was time for me to figure out who I was outside of being Ethan's mother, and I was ready to begin. The days that followed were filled with a strange mix of emptiness and clarity. I spent most of my time alone, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't want to feel bitter about it. Ethan was my son, after all, but every time I thought about his cold words, a wave of anger would rise within me. How could he treat me this way after everything I had done for him? The more I replayed that conversation in my head, the more I understood just how deep the wound went. It wasn't just the words he said, it was the underlying message. I don't need you anymore. I don't care. But as time passed, something inside me began to shift. The pain I initially felt started to turn into something else. A quiet, burning resolve. I couldn't change Ethan. I couldn't make him appreciate me, no matter how much I had done for him. But what I could do was change how I saw myself. And more importantly, how I allowed others to see me. I wasn't some old, forgotten mother clinging to the scraps of her son's life. I had my own worth, and it was time I started acting like it. I spent hours reflecting on my life, my choices, and the way I had always put others first. It wasn't just Ethan, it had been my entire life. My ex-husband, my job, my friends, everyone had expected something from me, and I had always been the one to deliver. But in doing that, I had neglected myself. I had been so busy making sure everyone else was happy that I forgot about what made me happy. It was like I had become invisible in my own life, constantly fading into the background while everyone else took center stage. That was when the idea came to me, an idea that felt right, that felt like the beginning of something new. I decided that I would stop looking for validation from Ethan. I didn't need his approval anymore. I had done everything for him, and I had given him the best of me. But now, I had to give the best of me to myself. The love I had for him would never go away, but I couldn't let it define me. And if he didn't want to be a part of my life anymore, then that was his choice, not mine. I also decided that I wouldn't let the situation go to waste. I had made a huge sacrifice for Ethan without him even knowing it. The new car. It was still sitting in the garage, waiting for him. And although a part of me wanted to tell him, to make him see the lengths I had gone to for him, I decided against it. The gift wasn't for his thanks, it was for me. I had given him everything I could, but now I needed to keep something for myself. The car could wait. Maybe one day, when the dust settled, I would tell him. But for now, it was just another reminder of the person I had been. Selfless, always thinking of others before myself. I took small steps to reclaim my life. I started looking into new hobbies, things I had never had time for before. I enrolled in a painting class, something I had always wanted to try but had put off for years. I signed up for yoga, something to help me clear my mind and center myself. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something for myself. Not for anyone else, not to please anyone, but because I wanted to. In the back of my mind, I knew that Ethan would eventually realize what he had done. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. When that day came, I wanted to be strong enough to face him, to show him that I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was a woman who had lived for others her entire life and had finally found the courage to live for herself. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what would happen next. Would Ethan come back? Would he apologize? I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was free from the weight of expectations. I was free to be who I was, without fear of judgment, without the need to prove myself to anyone. I was ready to live my own life on my own terms. And whatever Ethan chose to do with his life, that was his decision. As much as it hurt, I knew I had to let him make it. The days began to blur together, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself enjoying the quiet. I spent my mornings painting, my afternoons walking in the park, and my evenings watching the sunsets from the small balcony of my apartment. It wasn't a luxurious life by any means, but it was mine, and that was enough for me. I had peace, something I hadn't felt in years. It was like I had spent my entire life running on fumes, always giving and never receiving. But now, I was slowly refueling. Ethan never called. It was strange to admit, but a part of me had expected him to reach out after a few days, maybe after thinking about what had happened. But there was nothing. No message, no apology, no attempt to make amends. And in a way, it hurt. But it also gave me clarity. Ethan wasn't the person I thought he was, and maybe that was something I needed to accept. He had his own path, and if that path didn't involve me, then so be it. Still, there were moments when I couldn't help but wonder if he was regretting his decision. Was he thinking about the things I had done for him? Did he feel the sting of guilt when he looked around at the life he had, knowing that it was all built on my sacrifices? But those thoughts were fleeting. I couldn't keep waiting around for him to figure it out. I had waited long enough. One afternoon, as I was returning home from a walk, I spotted a car parked outside my apartment complex. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as I drew closer, my heart skipped a beat. The car was brand new, sleek and shining in the afternoon sun. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. I knew exactly what it was. It was the car I had bought for Ethan, the car I had been keeping a secret, the one I thought I would give him, the one I imagined would make him smile, the one that could possibly heal the rift between us. It was right there, parked outside, as though the universe was reminding me that I still had a choice to make. For a brief moment, I considered driving it to his house, handing him the keys and telling him everything. I imagined his face, his reaction to the gift, how it might change everything between us. But then I stopped myself. It wasn't about the car, it never was. It was about something far deeper. The respect, the love, the appreciation I had given him, and the way it had all been thrown away. No, I realized, I wasn't ready to give him the car. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not until he understood that love wasn't about things. It was about mutual respect, trust, and gratitude. And if he couldn't see that now, then he wasn't ready for what I had to offer. I wasn't just handing over a car, I was handing over a part of myself. And until he showed me that he could appreciate that, I wasn't going to make the same mistake again. Instead of walking towards the car, I turned and went back inside my apartment. I sat down by the window, looking out over the city. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over everything. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I didn't need Ethan's validation anymore. I had already given him everything I had, and now it was time for me to focus on the life I was building for myself. As I settled into this new chapter, I started to realize something. I wasn't just healing from my son's rejection. I was healing from the years of putting myself last. I had spent so much time making sure everyone around me was happy that I had forgotten what it meant to be happy myself. But now, I was finally learning how to be content with my own company, with my own choices, and with the person I had become. Ethan, I knew, would eventually have to come to terms with his actions. Maybe it would be tomorrow, maybe years from now, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to wait around for him to decide that he wanted to be a part of my life again. I had already moved on. The question was, would he? It wasn't long before I started receiving calls from people who had noticed the change in me. Some of them were old friends, acquaintances, even distant family members who had heard about my job loss and reached out with concern. At first, I appreciated the kindness, the messages of support. But as the days went on, I started noticing something else. People didn't just care about my well-being. They cared about the why. They wanted to know what I was going to do next. How would I bounce back? What was my plan? Everyone seemed to expect me to get back on track, to return to my old life of sacrifices and hard work. But I didn't have an answer for them. And then there were the texts and calls from Ethan. At first, I ignored them. I didn't want to hear it, not yet. But as the silence between us stretched on, I started to feel a flicker of guilt. Was I being too harsh? Was I punishing him for something that was just a mistake, a misunderstanding? Maybe, just maybe, he didn't realize how much his words had hurt me. Maybe he didn't see the depth of my sacrifice and love for him. So one evening, I decided to call him back. My hands trembled as I dialed his number. The moment it rang, I felt the weight of the years we had spent together, the years I had devoted to him. When he picked up, there was a brief silence before he spoke. "Mom?" His voice was softer than I had expected, almost hesitant. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady but quiet. "We need to talk." For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could feel the tension on the other end of the line, as if he was waiting for me to say something, anything, that would explain why I had suddenly cut him off. But I wasn't going to explain myself. Not this time. Instead, I simply asked, "Why did you treat me that way? After everything I've done for you, everything I've given up, why did you turn your back on me?" There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, it was clear that he wasn't prepared for this conversation. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. His voice faltered, and I could hear the frustration in his tone. I was stressed. I didn't know how else to react. "I thought you'd bounce back, like you always do. You always have, right?" The words stung. "You thought I would bounce back," I repeated, my voice thick with emotion. "You really think that after everything I've done for you, I don't need anything in return? That I should just be fine because that's what you've always seen me as? Strong, independent?" Ethan didn't respond. I could tell he didn't know how to answer, and frankly, I didn't expect him to. He had never seen me as anything more than a provider, a source of stability. He had never understood the toll it took on me to be the one holding everything together. I had always been his rock, but now I needed someone to be mine. "Don't you see, Ethan, this isn't just about the money or the job. It's about the fact that you've never really seen me. Not for who I am, but only for what I can do for you." I paused, letting my words sink in. "And that's why I had to change things. That's why I'm not going back to being the person you expect me to be. I gave you everything I had, but I can't keep doing that. Not when I'm the one losing myself in the process." There was a long silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, but he didn't speak. It was as if he was processing what I had just said. And as much as I wanted him to understand, to feel the weight of my words, I knew that wasn't going to happen in one conversation. This was going to take time, maybe even years. But it was time I didn't have to waste anymore. "I need you to understand, Ethan," I said, my voice firmer now. "I'm not asking for your approval. I'm not asking you to fix everything. I've already done that for myself. But I need you to see me for who I am, not as the woman who gives and gives until there's nothing left. I need you to see me as a person, not as a resource." His voice was quieter this time, and I could sense that something had changed in him. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't realize. I really didn't." For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would be the start of something. Maybe Ethan would finally begin to understand, to appreciate all that I had done. But as I held the phone in my hand, I realized that it didn't matter. Whether or not he changed, whether or not he finally understood, was up to him. What mattered was that I had finally spoken my truth. I had said what needed to be said, and I was no longer afraid to stand up for myself. "Thank you," I said quietly, my tone softening. "But don't expect me to come running back, Ethan. Not for your approval, not for your needs. I've done enough running. From now on, I'm walking my own path." And with that, I ended the call. I didn't feel a wave of relief, nor did I feel an overwhelming sense of closure. It was more like a quiet understanding, a realization that I had finally taken the first step in reclaiming my life. Ethan's journey was his own, and as much as I loved him, I couldn't walk it for him. But mine? That was something I could control. And for the first time, I wasn't going to let anyone dictate it. The days that followed after my conversation with Ethan felt strange, almost surreal. It was as if a weight had been lifted, but at the same time, I wasn't sure what to do with this new freedom I had given myself. I was no longer constantly tied to his needs, his expectations. For the first time in decades, I had the space to just be. I spent hours sitting by the window, reflecting on everything that had happened, letting my thoughts roam freely. I realized that I had been living in a constant state of worry, always second-guessing my choices, always thinking about how others would react to me. But now, I was starting to understand that the most important opinion was my own. Ethan had left a void in my life. I could admit that, but at the same time, I knew I wasn't the same person I had been before. That person had been driven by guilt, love, and a sense of duty. This new version of myself, though, she was ready to embrace independence, to finally stop putting everyone else's happiness before her own. I wasn't sure if Ethan would ever truly appreciate the sacrifices I had made, but that didn't matter anymore. I was no longer waiting for him to change or apologize. I had my own life to live. Still, there was the issue of the car, the brand new car I had bought for him. It felt almost like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. It was a beautiful car, something I knew he had wanted for years. But now, it felt like something I had given for the wrong reasons. I had hoped it would heal the rift between us, that it might bring us closer, but I wasn't sure if Ethan was ready to see it for what it was, a gesture of love, not a transaction. The car sat in the garage, its polished surface gleaming in the dim light. I had thought about taking it back, maybe selling it, but something stopped me. It wasn't about the car, it was about the principle behind it. I had worked hard to buy it, just as I had worked hard for everything I had ever given him. But the truth was, I couldn't give him something I wasn't ready to give, and right now, I wasn't ready. I decided to put it out of my mind for the time being. I needed to focus on my own life now, and I couldn't keep dwelling on what could have been or what I thought would work out. It was time to stop waiting for things to fall into place. It was time to make my own path. One evening, while I was browsing through an online magazine, I saw an ad for a weekend retreat, a place where people could go to reset, to recharge. The idea of spending a few days away from everything with no distractions sounded like exactly what I needed. I clicked on the link, signed up for the retreat, and just like that, I had made a decision that was completely for myself. No one had asked me to do this. No one had suggested it. I was doing it for my own peace of mind. It wasn't a luxury trip, but it didn't matter. The simple idea of being in a quiet, peaceful space, surrounded by nature, felt like the first real step I'd taken toward reclaiming my own life. I needed to get away, to clear my head, and to finally process everything that had happened. As I packed my bag, I thought about how different this felt from the past. I had always planned things for other people, always thought about what they needed first. But now, I was thinking only about what I needed, what I wanted. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was taking control. That weekend, I arrived at the retreat. The air was fresh, and the place was calm, nestled in a quiet valley far from the city. There were no distractions, no ringing phones, no constant demands, just nature and me. I spent my days walking along the trails, sitting by the lake, reading, and simply reflecting on the choices I had made. It was peaceful, almost like a cleansing of my spirit. I didn't talk about Ethan. I didn't think about what he was doing or whether he regretted his actions. For the first time in years, I let myself just exist in the moment. And as I sat by the lake one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. The car wasn't just a gift. It was my final attempt to bridge a gap that had already widened beyond repair. It was a symbol of everything I had tried to fix, to make right. But it wasn't mine to fix anymore. Ethan would have to figure out his own path just as I was figuring out mine. I had given him everything, and now I was giving myself the same opportunity to live without the burden of guilt or obligation. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And if Ethan ever came to understand that, if he ever learned what it meant to appreciate what had been given to him, that would be his journey, not mine. As the days passed, I felt stronger, more at peace with my decision. I knew that it wasn't the end of my story with Ethan, but it was the beginning of a new chapter for me, one where I was no longer defined by my sacrifices, but by my choices. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a future a future that was mine to shape. The retreat ended far too soon, but when I returned home, something had shifted within me. The calmness I had found there stayed with me, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the peaceful surroundings or the quiet moments of reflection. It was the realization that I didn't have to be anyone's caretaker anymore. I had spent decades looking after everyone else, and now it was time to look after myself. The thought didn't feel selfish. It felt necessary, but as I settled back into my routine, there was one thing that kept lingering in my mind: Ethan. Though I had moved on from the initial sting of his rejection, I couldn't help but wonder if he was still struggling with the fallout. His silence had stretched on for weeks now, and I hadn't heard a word from him since our last conversation. At first, I had convinced myself that this was for the best. I didn't need him to come running back, didn't need him to apologize. But the more time passed, the more that small voice in the back of my head began to speak louder. Was he okay? Was he going through his own kind of pain, even if he didn't know how to show it? One afternoon, I was out for a walk when I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, but when I did, I almost dropped my phone. It was a message from Ethan, a simple but loaded text. "I messed up, Mom. I'm sorry. Can we talk?" The flood of emotions that hit me was overwhelming. Part of me felt relief. Part of me felt anger, resentment even. But above all, I felt confusion. Was this genuine? Was this just another attempt to fix things on his terms? I had told myself I wasn't going to let him back into my life just because he needed something from me. But I couldn't ignore the fact that this message was different. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a demand. It was an apology. For once, Ethan wasn't asking for something from me. He was offering something. I sat on a nearby bench, staring at the screen, unsure of what to do next. Did I want to hear what he had to say? Did I want to risk reopening the wounds I had just begun to heal? I had to admit that part of me was curious. Curious about whether or not he had truly changed. Curious about how much of what I had said had sunk in. But another part of me, the part that had learned to put myself first, knew that I couldn't rush into anything. This wasn't just about my son, it was about me. It was about how far I had come, how much I had changed, and whether I was ready to open that door again. I took a deep breath and put my phone away. No answer, not yet. I needed time to think. This was a pivotal moment. If I chose to let him back into my life, things would never be the same. It wasn't just about giving him the car or fixing things. It was about establishing new boundaries, new expectations. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting to his needs. I was deciding what I needed, and that decision wasn't going to be made hastily. Over the next few days, I thought long and hard about how I wanted to handle this. I knew the temptation to fall back into my old role would be strong. I could easily slip into the pattern of giving, forgiving, and excusing his behavior, but I couldn't do that. I had spent too long sacrificing myself for others, and I wasn't about to go back to being the person who would let herself be walked over. I had to protect the new version of myself, this woman who had learned to put herself first, this woman who had learned to embrace her independence. So I finally made up my mind. I would respond to Ethan's message. But I wasn't going to jump back into old habits. I wasn't going to play the role of the perfect mother who always forgave, always gave. I was going to tell him the truth. Tell him that his apology, though appreciated, didn't change everything. I wasn't going to rush into anything, and I wasn't going to just let him back into my life without setting new boundaries. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my phone, and typed a response. I paused for a moment, thinking about how I wanted to word it. I didn't want to sound cold, but I didn't want to sound desperate either. I wanted to be firm, but fair. So, I simply wrote, "I appreciate your apology, Ethan, but things have changed. I've changed, and I'm not going to just jump back into the way things were. If you want a relationship, it will be on my terms. No more expecting me to give everything, no more taking me for granted. If you're ready for that, we can talk." I hit send and sat back staring at the screen. My heart pounded in my chest, but a sense of calm washed over me. I had said what needed to be said. I had set my boundaries. I wasn't waiting for Ethan to fix things. I was taking control of my own life, regardless of whether or not he was part of it. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had finally started to take control, and no matter what happened next, I knew I was doing the right thing. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself, and that felt better than anything I had ever experienced. The days that followed felt strangely calm. The initial flood of anxiety that had hit me when I sent the message to Ethan slowly ebbed away. It was almost as if I had taken a deep breath for the first time in years, one that allowed me to finally exhale. I wasn't waiting on anyone anymore. I wasn't holding my breath for Ethan to make the next move or for someone else to tell me how I should feel. I was simply existing, and it was enough. The message I had sent didn't receive an immediate response. At first, I had braced myself for the usual back and forth of texting, the endless explanations and apologies that seemed to come every time Ethan and I had a falling out. But this time, things were different. It had been nearly a week without a word from him. And as I went about my days, painting, gardening, reading, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really the change I had hoped for? Was Ethan truly reflecting on his actions, or was he just giving me space to stew in my anger? As the silence stretched on, I realized that this might be the last time I heard from him. Maybe he had learned his lesson, or maybe he hadn't. But regardless of what happened, I knew I couldn't sit around and wait. I couldn't wait for someone else to fix me, to make me feel worthy. I had to keep moving forward, even if it meant doing it alone. The quietness of my days started to feel less like loneliness and more like freedom. For the first time in so long, I wasn't trying to please anyone or fix anything. I had stopped trying to change people, stopped looking for validation from others. I was content with who I was becoming. Then, one afternoon, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I thought it might be Ethan, but it wasn't. It was someone from the real estate agency I had been in touch with months ago about a new property I had been eyeing. They told me that a house had just come available, one I had put on a waiting list for, and asked if I was still interested. I was taken aback for a second, unsure if this was the right time to make such a big decision. But then it hit me. Why not? Why not go for it? It wasn't about running away from my past or from Ethan. It was about starting fresh. This could be my next step in truly living for myself, without holding on to the past, without waiting for someone else to come to my rescue. So I told them I was interested, and we scheduled a viewing for the next day. That evening, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, trying on outfits for the viewing. I hadn't cared about how I looked in ages. I had spent so many years working around the clock and caring for others that I'd forgotten to look after myself. But now, standing there, I realized how different things were. I wasn't dressing up for anyone else. I was dressing up for me. As I left for the appointment the next morning, I felt a thrill in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. I was moving forward. I wasn't looking back. I wasn't asking anyone for permission. I was doing this for myself. The house was everything I had hoped for, spacious, bright, and full of potential. As I toured the rooms, imagining my life in each space, I realized something. I wasn't just buying a property. I was investing in my future, in a new chapter where I would no longer be defined by my past mistakes, my son's rejection, or anyone else's expectations. I was buying freedom. By the time I left the house, I had made up my mind. I would make an offer. I would take this next step, no matter where it led. This was my life now. I wasn't asking anyone for permission to live it. The offer went through faster than I expected, and within days I was signing the paperwork. It wasn't a flashy mansion, nor was it the grand dream home I had imagined when I was younger. It was simple, cozy, and perfect for starting over. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. This wasn't just a house. It was my personal statement, a statement that I had taken control of my life, a statement that I was no longer going to be the person who waited for others to decide my worth. When I received the keys to the house, I couldn't help but smile. It felt surreal, but in the best way possible. This place was mine, and it represented everything I had fought for: independence, strength, and the courage to start fresh. As I walked through the empty rooms, I imagined filling them with things that brought me joy. This was my sanctuary, my retreat. And then, as I stood in the kitchen thinking about how I would decorate it, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I had been so wrapped up in the moment that I hadn't checked it in hours. When I pulled it out, I saw it was a message from Ethan. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot. I owe you an apology. I've been selfish, and I took you for granted. I was wrong, and I want to make things right. Please, can we talk?" A mix of emotions washed over me. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was relieved, knowing that Ethan had finally come to his senses, but another part of me wasn't sure I was ready to open that door again. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I could just forgive him and go back to the way things were. I read the message over and over, weighing my options. I could call him, hear him out, see if he was truly sincere. But I wasn't sure I was ready to take that step just yet. I had taken so much time to rebuild my own life, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared to dive back into the role of the forgiving mother who always put her child's needs before her own. Instead of responding immediately, I set the phone down and took a deep breath. I wasn't going to rush into anything. I wasn't going to be the same person who had always allowed herself to be taken advantage of. I had set my boundaries, and I wasn't about to let those boundaries crumble just because of an apology. For the first time in a long time, I realized that my peace didn't depend on whether or not Ethan came back into my life. It depended on me. I would respond to him in my own time. But right now, I needed to focus on what I wanted, on what I needed. And as I stood in my new kitchen, looking out at my new life, I knew one thing for sure. I was finally living for myself. The rest, whatever happened, would come in its own time. A few days passed after Ethan's message, and I still hadn't replied. I found myself repeatedly reading the words he sent, unsure how to process them. The part of me that had always been a mother, the one who yearned for reconciliation, wanted to pick up the phone and call him. But another part, the part that had grown stronger over the past weeks, told me to pause, to breathe, to not rush back into something I wasn't sure I was ready for. I had learned to appreciate the quiet of my new life. The mornings I spent on my balcony with a cup of coffee, the evenings walking through my garden, and the hours I spent in the kitchen cooking meals I had never had time to prepare before. It was all so peaceful, so different from the chaos I had known for years. I couldn't ignore the fact that Ethan's absence had created a space I hadn't realized I needed. And that space wasn't filled with loneliness or bitterness. It was filled with the freedom to be myself, to finally be at peace with who I was. The house, my new sanctuary, became a symbol of this change. It wasn't just a physical space, it was the representation of my own growth, my journey to reclaim my life. As I settled into my new routine, I found myself doing things I never had time for. Going for walks at sunrise, taking up gardening, spending afternoons reading books that had been collecting dust for years. I felt like I was coming back to myself, piece by piece. This wasn't about anyone else. This was about me, about building a life that was mine. I continued to think about Ethan, of course. The bond we shared wasn't something that could be easily forgotten or severed. But I had to remind myself that I couldn't let my life revolve around him anymore. If he truly wanted a relationship, if he truly regretted what had happened, he would have to prove it. I wasn't going to give him the keys to my peace anymore. That part of me, the part that would bend over backwards for him, had to stay behind. The new me couldn't be that person again. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that I received another call from Ethan. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name on the screen, but I didn't feel the usual rush of emotions. Instead, I took a deep breath and answered, bracing myself for whatever he had to say. "Mom." His voice was hesitant, but there was a vulnerability there that I hadn't heard in a long time. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what you said. I just want to tell you, I'm really sorry for how I treated you. I didn't understand and I can't take back the things I said, but I'm trying to change. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to make it right, however long it takes. I felt a knot form in my chest. It was what I had been waiting for, right? An apology, finally. But it didn't feel like an instant fix. It felt like a start, just a start. And I wasn't sure if that was enough yet. Ethan, I began, my voice steady but not without emotion. I appreciate that you're finally seeing things for what they are, but it's not going to be easy. You don't get to come back into my life just because you're sorry. You've hurt me, and I can't just forget that. It's going to take time. I need time. I let the silence sit between us for a moment before adding, "You're right. You don't have to fix everything now, but we're not going to rush. I need to see actions, Ethan, not just words, and that's going to take time." "I understand, Mom," he replied softly. "I'll do whatever it takes. I just want the chance to prove I can do better." I felt a glimmer of hope, but it was a cautious hope. I wasn't ready to dive back into the role of the forgiving mother, the one who accepted apologies and moved on immediately. I needed him to show me the change. I needed him to show up, not just once, but consistently. "I'm not making promises, Ethan, but I'll think about it. That's all I can give right now," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was a little lighter than before. We ended the conversation on a more hopeful note than we had in months, but I still wasn't sure what would come next. For the first time, though, I wasn't afraid of the future. Whatever happened between us, I knew I had already started down a path where I would no longer lose myself in someone else's mistakes. I was finally learning to put myself first, and that was worth more than anything else. Section 10. The days stretched on, and slowly I began to feel a sense of detachment from the chaos that had once dominated my life. Ethan's message and our conversation had brought up old emotions, but I didn't let them overwhelm me. Instead, I focused on what I could control, myself. I kept up with my new routine. I painted, I gardened, I took time to savor the little things that had always been just out of reach when I was too busy for myself. As time went on, Ethan's calls became less frequent. I noticed the pattern. The words of apology would come, but then there would be nothing. It was almost like he was testing the waters, seeing if I would open up, if I would let him back in. But I didn't rush. I wasn't going to chase after him anymore. I had already done enough chasing in my life. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the lawyer who had helped me with my inheritance. I had completely forgotten about it until that moment. I opened it carefully, not knowing what to expect. As I read through the letter, my breath caught in my throat. It was news I hadn't anticipated. The legal documents regarding my inheritance were officially finalized. The trust fund, the one that had been left to me by my late employer, was now officially mine, and I was free to access it whenever I chose. The inheritance had always been a source of silent pride for me. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the recognition, the respect from someone who had seen my worth when no one else did. And now, with that final step completed, I had everything I needed to start truly living for myself. The news felt like a sign, a confirmation that I was on the right path. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the validation that I had spent so many years searching for in others. But now, I was beginning to understand that true validation had to come from within. The trust fund was a gift, a reminder that I had always been enough. I didn't need Ethan to see that. I didn't need anyone else to see it either. I had always had the power to create my own future. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel proud, not because of what I had given or what I had done for others, but because of who I had become. I wasn't a mother waiting for her son's approval. I was a woman who had lived through pain and sacrifice and come out on the other side stronger than before. As the days went by, I continued to enjoy my peace. Ethan's silence didn't sting anymore. It was just part of the process. If he was going to come back into my life, it would be on my terms, and he would have to prove that he was willing to meet me halfway. For now, though, I had my life, my independence, and a future I could finally look forward to. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. As time passed, my life began to feel like it was finally aligning in ways I hadn't expected. I kept my days full with things that brought me joy: painting, gardening, reading, and even spending afternoons trying out new recipes in the kitchen. I no longer felt the constant pressure to please others or to justify my existence. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and I was finally able to breathe freely. My new home, my quiet sanctuary, was everything I had dreamed of. It became more than just a house. It was a reflection of the new me, a woman who no longer lived for anyone else's approval. Ethan's silence, while difficult at times, no longer carried the sting it once did. I had accepted that he was on his own journey, and that meant I couldn't force him to understand or appreciate everything I had done for him. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for him to make the first move or apologize. I wasn't waiting for him to come back into my life. Instead, I was focused on building my own life, one where I didn't feel invisible, one where I was enough simply because I existed. Then, one evening, as I was sitting in my living room, I received a call that I hadn't anticipated. My phone rang, and the name on the screen was familiar. It was Ethan. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but another part, the part that still cared, couldn't bring myself to ignore him. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mom," his voice was tentative, almost unsure. "I know it's been a while, I need you to know I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I should have never treated you the way I did. I'm asking you to forgive me." His words hung in the air, and for a long moment I didn't know how to respond. The familiar pang of hurt tugged at my heart, but I also knew that the apology wasn't enough on its own. I needed more than just words. I needed action. "I'm not sure, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not sure forgiveness can be given just because you're sorry. You hurt me deeply, and it's going to take more than just saying the right things to fix that." "I understand," he replied, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm not asking you to forget. He paused. "I want you to know that I'm trying. I want to be different. I want to be the son you deserve, not the one I've been." I felt a flicker of hope, but I knew it wasn't the time to rush. I needed to see if he truly meant it, if he was willing to prove that change. "I'm glad you're trying," I said quietly, "but I need to see more. Words are easy, Ethan. It's the actions that matter. I can't just forgive you without knowing you've really changed." "I get it, Mom," he said softly. "I'll show you. I will. And I'll wait, however long it takes. I just want a chance to prove that I can be better." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of emotions: hope, cautious optimism, and a lingering uncertainty. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. But only if he was truly willing to change and make the effort. For now, I wasn't going to rush. I had my life to live, and I wasn't going to let anyone, even my own son, dictate how or when that happened. A week went by, and I continued to live my life with purpose. I didn't wait for Ethan's next move, and I didn't obsess over his apology. If he truly wanted to prove that he was different, he would show it in his actions, not just his words. And in the meantime, I wasn't going to allow his mistakes to define me any longer. I kept myself busy with the things that brought me peace. Taking walks in the morning, spending time in the garden, and working on a painting I had started weeks ago. For the first time, I was focusing on my own happiness without feeling guilty about it. I had spent so many years giving and giving, waiting for recognition or gratitude. But now I realized that the only recognition I needed was from myself. Then, one morning, as I was getting ready for my daily walk, I received another call from Ethan. This time, I felt more prepared. I wasn't expecting an apology, but I was curious to see what he had to say. "Mom," he began, his voice steady, I just wanted to check in. I know things aren't back to normal between us, but I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I want to do better, not just for you, but for myself. I've been talking to a counselor, and I'm really trying to work through my issues. I'm not asking you to forgive me now, but I want you to know I'm taking steps to change. I took a deep breath, letting his words settle in. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was the first real sign that Ethan wasn't just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. He was actively doing something to change. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a step in the right direction. I'm glad you're getting help, Ethan, I said, my voice calmer than I had expected. It's a good step, and I'm not saying that we're going to be okay overnight, but if you're truly willing to change, we'll take it one day at a time. I will, Mom, I promise. I just want to make things right, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Take your time, I replied softly. We'll see how things go, but for now, keep working on yourself. That's all I can ask for. As we ended the call, I felt a small spark of hope. I wasn't ready to let him back into my life completely, but I was starting to see that change was possible, and that, in itself, was a victory. I had spent so many years waiting for things to get better, for others to change. But now, I understood that change had to come from within, and I was finally learning to live for myself, regardless of the outcomes. The road ahead would be long, but I was walking it on my own terms, and that was something no one could take from me. The weeks passed by, and each day felt a little lighter than the one before. Ethan's calls became more frequent, but I noticed a shift in the way I responded. I didn't feel desperate for him to fill the empty space in my life anymore. I was content with the life I had built for myself, and I realized that I wasn't relying on him to make me feel whole. For the first time, I was complete without needing someone else to define my worth. Ethan was still in the process of changing, but the difference now was that I wasn't waiting for his transformation to validate my own. I had already transformed. I had already found my strength, my peace, and my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my son, take that away from me. One afternoon, I received a message from Ethan that was different from the others. It wasn't an apology or an attempt to explain himself. It was simple. I've been thinking about what you said. I know I have a long way to go, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You've always been strong, even when you didn't realize it. I want to be the kind of person who can be proud of, too. I just want to say thank you for everything. The words caught me off guard. I wasn't sure what to feel, but a part of me felt the tiniest glimmer of hope. It wasn't an immediate fix. It wasn't the grand gesture I had once imagined, but it was something. And sometimes, something was all I needed. I took a deep breath and typed back a simple message. Thank you, Ethan. I'm proud of you too. Keep working on yourself. I didn't know what the future held, and I didn't need to. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. Whether or not Ethan and I would ever fully reconcile didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I was living for me, and that was enough. And with that, I closed the door on a chapter of my life that had defined me for far too long. I was finally free. Free to live, free to love, and free to be exactly who I was meant to be. As the months continued to unfold, I began to realize how far I had come. Ethan's occasional calls became less frequent, but I didn't mind. I didn't need constant validation from him anymore. He had started to change, and I had started to embrace the new version of myself, one who wasn't bound by the expectations of others, especially not my son. I threw myself into my life even more, learning new things and enjoying the simple pleasures I had once overlooked. I went on solo trips to explore new cities, something I had always dreamed of but had put off because I was too busy managing the needs of others. I found peace in exploring the world on my own terms, in a way I never could have before. It wasn't that I had forgotten about Ethan or dismissed our past. Quite the opposite. He was still a part of my life, even if from a distance. But I had come to understand something deeply important. I didn't have to sacrifice my happiness for him or anyone else anymore. Our relationship, whatever it would become, would be on my terms. And for the first time, I was okay with that. One evening, as I returned from a small trip to the mountains, I found a letter waiting for me. It was from Ethan. I recognized the handwriting immediately. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, unsure of what it would say. When I read the first few lines, I realized that this letter was different from all the others. It wasn't just an apology or an attempt at reconciliation. It was an expression of gratitude, of acknowledgement of everything we had been through. He thanked me for everything I had done for him and apologized for the pain he had caused. "I know I've made mistakes, Mom," the letter read, "and I know I don't deserve forgiveness right now. But I want you to know that I am working on myself, and I'll keep working on being the kind of person you deserve. You've always been the strongest person I know, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, even when I couldn't see it." Reading those words brought a sense of closure that I hadn't known I was missing. It wasn't the resolution I had once envisioned, but it was enough. He had started the work of becoming the person he needed to be, not for me, but for himself. And that, in the end, was all I could ask for. I didn't respond to the letter right away. I knew it wasn't necessary. The healing had already begun, and I had learned to appreciate the distance. For the first time in years, I wasn't consumed by guilt or expectation. I was simply living. A few months later, I was walking through my favorite park when I bumped into someone I hadn't expected to see, Nicole, Ethan's wife. We had always shared a strained relationship, but in that moment, something about her expression told me this encounter wasn't just by chance. She approached me hesitantly, as if unsure of what to say. "Margaret," she said, her voice soft but cautious, "I've been meaning to talk to you. I know we've never really gotten along, but I wanted to apologize for how I treated you. I know I was wrong." I was taken aback. Nicole had never been one to apologize or admit fault. She'd always been quick to judge and quick to criticize. But here she was, standing in front of me, offering an apology. "I was unfair to you," she continued, her eyes meeting mine. "I see now how much you've done for Ethan and how much you've given, and I want to say that I'm sorry for making you feel like you didn't matter." For a moment, I just stood there, processing her words. I had spent so many years feeling dismissed by her, feeling like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. But here she was, acknowledging the truth. It wasn't an apology that could erase the past, but it was an important step, and it was something I had never expected from her. "I appreciate that, Nicole," I said quietly. "I don't think either of us expected this moment, but I accept your apology. It's a step in the right direction." She nodded, a look of relief on her face. "I hope we can start over in some way. I really do. And I hope Ethan can start being the son you deserve." I didn't know if that was ever possible, but in that moment, I realized that the journey wasn't just about me and Ethan. It was about all of us. Growing, learning, and evolving. Maybe, just maybe, we could move forward with a little more understanding. Maybe the past didn't have to define us. Nicole gave me a small, tentative smile before turning to leave. I watched her walk away, not with bitterness or resentment, but with something different. Acceptance. I had worked hard to let go of the hurt, and this moment, this small but significant shift, felt like the final piece falling into place. Several months passed, and the weight of the past continued to lift. Ethan and I continued to rebuild our relationship, but it wasn't the same as it had been before. It was different now, healthier. We talked more openly, and though the wounds of the past weren't completely healed, they were no longer defining us. We had both changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. I still remembered the days of feeling invisible, of sacrificing myself for others who never truly saw me. But those days felt far away now. I had built a life for myself, a life where I didn't have to wait for someone else's approval or apology to feel worthy. I had learned to live for myself, and that made all the difference. One evening, as I sat in my garden, a gentle breeze brushing through the trees, I realized something. I had spent so many years giving my love and care to others, never asking for anything in return. But now, I had learned that the greatest gift I could give myself was to finally take care of me. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew that I was exactly where I needed to be. Finally free, finally whole, and finally at peace. No matter what the future held, I had taken back my power. I had taken back my life. And that, in the end, was enough.